When we're ready to output a rendering to an image file, we'll need to go into the Render Setup dialog and choose the appropriate options. I'll open that dialog up, Render Setup, and we've got the Scanline renderer as our current renderer. As I mentioned earlier in the chapter on camera and layout, we can control the resolution of the rendered image here in the output size section. And I've got a preset I've made for 853 by 480. We can change that if we want. Maybe I want to render out an image at 1280 by 720, which is the same resolution as my current capture area for the demo here. I can do that by going into this output size pull-down list and choosing HDTV at the bottom. And we got a preset there for 1280 by 720. In this Common tab here, we also have the ability to do things like turn off certain effects such as atmospheres and render effects such as lens flares. Most importantly, though, scroll down a little bit further. Here's where we want to determine the render output. There's actually a shortcut to that up here. We can click on this little icon or button there, and that'll do the same thing as clicking on the Files button here. This allows us to determine where our file is going to be saved. And we do want to save into the default folder, which is our current project's render output. And we need to give it a name. I'll call this one Scanline Test or something like that. And I need to give it a file format. And I can do that by choosing from this Save As Type pull-down list. Really, the best option in this case is PNG, which is a losslessly compressed image file. It's really very compatible with all systems. And if we want to choose the options for the PNG, we can click on this Setup button. If we've never chosen that image file type before, then if we click Save, we should see a pop-up dialog appear. And it has appeared now. And I previously changed the options here in an earlier movie. The default is actually a 48-bit with transparency or alpha. But what I actually want in this case is no transparency and a 24-bit or 8 bits per channel RGB file. Okay, going back in there just for a moment, if I go back to that Files dialog, if I want to change those options for the file output, I can click on Setup here. But it's got a little bit of an issue. You'll need to click that Setup button twice in order to go into that configuration dialog and change those settings. All right, cool. So we've determined a file output, and the Save File checkbox has turned itself on. It's also available up here. If you need to change any of the settings specific to the particular renderer, then you would go into these other tabs. The Common tab is the same for all of the renderers. The Scanline renderer, for example, if we go to the Renderer tab here, has the ability to change up the anti-aliasing or the de-jagging of pixels. We could go down into here and, for example, turn motion blur on and things like that. That is going to be specific to the Scanline renderer. Likewise with all these other tabs. These are all specific to the particular renderer, except for this one, which is Render Elements. That allows you to save out the different aspects of the rendering to separate files. If you're in an advanced production workflow, you might want to save out the diffuse components separate to reflections and then add them together in Photoshop or After Effects or some other program. And by the way, I do cover that process in another course if you're interested. It's creating product shots in 3ds Max. We go over render elements in that course. All right, cool. So now when I click render, it's going to render not just to the screen, but save to a file. Go ahead and click on render. And the rendered frame window is displaying the image at half size right now. You can see that it says 1:2, and that's just because the 1280 by 720 image would not actually fit onto a 1280 by 720 desktop here. But if we want to, we could zoom in. I could maximize that rendered frame window and then use the mouse wheel to zoom in and examine the image at full resolution. And I can also use the middle mouse button and kind of pan around to take a look at it. All right, that's how we set up our basic render options, and especially file output.